Again, it'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. And the man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 talents more. Those talents were treasure they held. It would have been a unit of gold or silver. It would have represented a lot of money in the day. And so also the one with the 2 talents went and gained 2 more, and the one who had received the 1 went off, dug a hole in the ground, hid his master's money, and after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. And the man who had received the 5 said, Master, you've entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I've gained 5 more. And his master replied, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'm going to put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And the man with the 2 came and said, Master, you entrusted me with 2. See, I've gained 2 more. And word for word, he gets the same blessing. Well done, good and faithful. Down in verse 24, and then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you're a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out, and I hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. And his master replied, You wicked, lazy servant, so you knew that I harvested where I have not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed. And then you should have put my money on deposit with a banker, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. And take that 1 talent and give it to the one who has the 10. For he who's been entrusted with a lot will have a lot. And then throw this servant out. And I got to tell you, this is one of those stories in the Bible that I don't really like. In fact, I like to tell stories. And if I were Jesus, I would have actually told this story differently. In fact, when I get to heaven, I want to talk to him about this story. Because there's some things in this story that he could have done that it would have made it a little better for us. For example, how come one guy got 5, one guy got 2, and one guy got 1? After all, why shouldn't we start them all out on the same ground? They all got like 2.3 something. Why give 1 5, 1 2, 1 1? Because after all, we are all created equal, aren't we? But we know that's not true. We start in different places. We have different opportunities. Some of us have natural gifts and abilities. Others of us have learned gifts and abilities. Some of us feel like 5 talent people, and most of us, like me, feel like a 1 talent person. I wish Jesus would have told that story. And here's another thing. If I would have had to tell it like he told it, here's what I would have done. Guess who would have been the hero in the story? Not the dude who started with a lot. The guy who got the 1. He would have been the underdog in the story. That guy with the 5 would have gone out and done some kind of Ponzi scheme deal and ended up in jail and on the newspaper. But that 1 talent guy would have scraped and clawed and made his way up and done this big deal thing. Here's another thing I don't like about this story, actually. I think he could have done a better job with. The master gives these guys this money. Now, the Bible calls them trusted servants, so they were in his care. They were part of the family, so to speak. These weren't some random strangers out on the street. He gives them this talent, and then Jesus says it this way, and the master then got in his car and left and didn't give many instructions. Didn't say to them, now here's what I want you to do with this. To you with the 5, I'd like you to arbitrage that money. And the one with the 2, I think you ought to invest in some commodities if you can. And the guy with the 1, I think you ought to just go out and figure out how to start some small businesses and see if they'll be fruitful. He doesn't give them any instructions. He doesn't say, here's how I want you to do it. Here's another part of the story that I don't like, actually. Well, since we're talking about parts I don't like. The master doesn't say when he's coming back. He just shows up one day. That's not fair. No text, no email, no call saying, hey, 30 days, I'll be back. And when we get back, why don't we get together and see what you've done with what I've given? There is none of that in this story. And that's, unfortunately, how this faith thing is for me. God's given us something. He's invited us to be a part of his story. I'm so grateful for the grace that changes our lives, the grace that invites us in, the grace that saves us, the grace that makes me one of the trusted servants. This isn't a story about salvation. This is a story about what happens after. This is a story about what do I do now as a follower. This is a story about God, you've invited me to write a part of the story. What am I doing with that? And I'm not given a lot of clarity around this. I'm not sent, a postcard saying, and here's exactly what I think you ought to do, and here's what I think you're gifted at, and here's where I think you ought to plug in, and here's where you ought to be serving, and here's how you ought to be engaged. I don't get that. And I look around at others, and I think they're more capable than I am. They have more ability. They have more opportunity. They have more background and experience. Faith, I didn't have that. I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't have that connection. And then there's going to be a day when I take my last breath or the master shows up and I have to give an account for what I did. And I don't like that part either. I mean, we all kind of ought to go with it. Whatever happens, happens. And this one talent guy fails. And very quickly, there's 3 reasons in here why he did. Here's the first. Verse 18, from his perspective, safety first was his best option. I knew you'd be a hard man. I took what you had. I went to my backyard. I dug a hole. I buried it in the ground. I patted the dirt down on it. And now, here it is. You can have it back. Look, I didn't blow it. I didn't squander it. I didn't screw up with this. It's intact. Here, it's yours. And Jesus calls him a failure. He didn't fail because he lost it. He failed because he didn't use it. And so he took the choice that I'm going to take the careful route. And here's what I know about a whole bunch of us. If I were to ask you, and I won't do it, I don't want to be that unfair. How many of you want your life to make a difference? I would bet every time I've ever done this in any kind of audience, hands go up everywhere. We all want that. And how many of you feel like you are making a difference? And the truth is, when we're honest, most of us have to draw our hands back down. We want to do something, but so often we settle for less. I love what Ted Engstrom said. He said, I've never met a person who planned on having a mediocre life, but I've met a lot of mediocre people. And you know why that happens, I think? It's because we draw this little circle of comfort around us where the world is safe for us. And we don't want to move out of our comfort zone. We don't want to move and make some change in our life. We're not looking for that engagement. We're not looking for that. We'd like to do something, but... Or sometimes it happens this way. Someday I'm going to. Maybe when I get out of school, or maybe when our kids are grown or more settled, or maybe when we are a little more financially secure, or somehow when we retire. Someday I'm going to find a way where I really do something. I'm going to engage. I'm going to serve. I'm going to find a way for my life to be engaged in the story that God's inviting me. I'm going to do that someday. And here's a truth for every one of us in the room. Someday your somedays are going to be over. There'll be a day you draw your last breath. And here's what's going to happen on that day. Someone's going to sit down and plan a service for you, a funeral service or a memorial service. And then somebody like me is going to say some things about you. And during the service, we're going to say nice things. We get paid to do that. Sometimes it's creative, but we find things to say. And the service is going to wrap up, and then we're going to go across the hall somewhere or to your home or to some park, and we're going to have a little reception so that we can gather around the family. And then while people are eating potato salad, they're going to talk about you, really talk about you. And what will they say mattered to you? What will they say the things you did that somehow touched them or served in some way? This guy was too cautious. Safety first was his best option. There are times to be careful. There are times for us to be safe. But until you and I are free to fail, we are never free to succeed.